Hello, everybody. I thought it would be a good way for you to listen and practice hearing an English speaker reading. So I thought that it would be a good idea to share a book with you. So every week I will share a little bit of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe to begin with. There are 7 books altogether in this series, um, but I thought it would be good to begin with chapter 1 of this book. Um, and this is called Lucy Looks into a Wardrobe. Once there were 4 children whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. This story is about something that happened to them when they were sent away from London during the war because of the air raids. They were sent to the house of an old professor who lived in the heart of the country, 10 miles from the nearest station and 2 miles from the nearest post office. He had no wife, and he lived in a very large house with a housekeeper called Mrs. Macready and 3 servants. Their names were Ivy, Margaret, and Betty, but they do not come into the story much. He himself was a very old man with shaggy white hair, which grew over most of his face as well as on his head, and they liked him almost at once. But on the first evening when he came out to meet them at the front door, he was so odd looking that Lucy, who was the youngest, was a little afraid of him, and Edmund, who was the next youngest, wanted to laugh and keep on pretending he was blowing his nose to hide it. As soon as they had said good night to the professor and gone upstairs on the first night, the boys came into the girls' room and they all talked it over. "We've fallen on our feet and no mistake," said Peter. "This is going to be perfectly splendid. That old chap would let us do anything we like." "I think he's an old dear," said Susan. "Oh, come off it," said Edmund, who was all tired of pretending not to be tired, which always made him bad-tempered. "Don't go on talking like that." "Like what?" said Susan. "And anyway, it's time you're in bed." "Trying to talk like your mother," said Edmund. "And who are you to say when I'm to go to bed? Go to bed yourself." "Hadn't we all go to bed? Better go to bed," said Lucy. "There's sure to be a row if we're heard talking here." "No, there won't," said Peter. "And I tell you, this is the sort of house where no one's going to mind what we do. Anyway, they won't hear us. It's about 10 minutes walk from here down to that dining room, and any amount of stairs and passages in between." "What's that noise?" said Lucy suddenly. It was a far larger house than she had ever been in before, and the thought of all those passages and rows of doors leading into empty rooms was beginning to make her feel a little creepy. "It's only a bird, silly," said Edmund. "It's an owl," said Peter. "This is going to be a wonderful place for birds. I shall go to bed now. I say, let's go and explore tomorrow. You might find anything in a place like this. Did you see those mountains as we came along? And the woods? There might be eagles. There might be stags. There might, there might be hawks." "Badgers," said Lucy. "And foxes," said Edmund. "Rabbits," said Susan. But when next morning came, there was a steady rain falling, so thick that when you looked out to the window, you could neither see the mountains, nor the woods, nor the streams, or even the garden. "Of course it would be raining," said Edmund. They had just finished breakfast with the professor, and were upstairs in the room he had set apart for them, a long, low room with 2 windows looking in one direction and 2 looking in another. "Do stop grumbling, Ed," said Susan. 10 to 1 it will clear up in an hour or so. And in the meantime, we're pretty well off. There's a wireless and lots of books. Not for me, said Peter. I'm going to explore the house. Everyone agreed to this, and that was how the adventures began. It was a sort of house that you never seemed to come to the end of, and it was full of unexpected places. The first few doors they tried led only into spare bedrooms, as everyone had expected they would. But soon they came to a very long room full of pictures, and there they found a suit of armour. And after that, there was a room all hung with green with a harp in one corner. And then came 3 little steps down and 5 little steps up. And then a kind of a stairs hall and a door that led out onto a balcony. And then a whole series of rooms that led into each other and were lined with books. Most of them very old books, and some bigger than even the Bible in the church. And shortly after that, they looked into a room that was quite empty, except for one big wardrobe, the sort that has a looking glass in the door. There was nothing else in the room at all, except a dead blue bottle in the windowsill. Nothing there, said Peter, and they all stopped. All except Lucy. She stayed and looked again, and because she thought it would be worthwhile trying the door of the wardrobe, even though she felt almost sure it would be locked. To her surprise, it opened quite easily, and 2 mothballs dropped out. Looking into the inside, she saw several coats hanging up, mostly long fur coats. There was nothing Lucy liked so much as the smell and feel of fur. She immediately stepped into the wardrobe and got in amongst the coats and rubbed her face against them, leaving the door open, of course, because she knew that it was very foolish to shut oneself into any wardrobe. Soon she went further in and found that there was a second row of coats hanging up behind the first one. It was almost quite dark in there, and she kept her arms stretched out in front of her so as not to bump her face into the back of the wardrobe. She took a step further in, then 2 or 3 steps, was expecting to feel woodwork against the tips of her fingers, but she couldn't feel it. This must be a simply enormous wardrobe, she thought, going still further in and pushing the soft folds of the coats aside to make room. Then she noticed there was something crunching under her feet. I wonder if there are more mothballs, she thought, stooping down to feel with her hand. But instead of feeling the hard, smooth wood of the floor of the wardrobe, she felt something soft and powdery and extremely cold. This is very queer, she said, and went on to a step or 2 further. Next moment she found that what she was rubbing against her face and hands was no longer soft fur, but something hard and rough and even prickly. Why, it's just like the branches of trees, exclaimed Lucy. And then she saw that there was a light ahead of her, not a few inches away. The back of the wardrobe ought to have been, but a long way off. Something cold and soft was falling on her. A moment later she found that she had been standing in the middle of the wood at night time, with snow under her feet and snowflakes falling through the air. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. She looked back over her shoulder, and there between the dark tree trunks she could still see the open doorway of the wardrobe, and even catch a glimpse of the empty room from which she set out. She had, of course, left the door open, for she knew it was very silly to shut oneself into a wardrobe. It seemed it was still daylight out there. I can always get back if anything goes wrong, thought Lucy. She began to walk forward, crunch, crunch over the snow, and through the wood towards the other light. In about 10 minutes she reached it and found it. It was a lamp post. As she stopped looking at it, wondering why there was a lamp post in the middle of a wood, and wondering what to do next, she heard a pitter-patter of feet coming towards her, and soon after that a very large person stepped out from amongst the trees and into the light of the lamppost. Oh, lost my place now. Never mind. Right. And so she's in the middle of a field, in the middle of a wood, and she's found a person with strange feet who stood amongst the trees under the lamppost. He was only a little taller than Lucy herself, and he carried over his head an umbrella white with snow. From the waist upwards he was like a little man, but his legs were shaped like a goat's. The hair on them was glossy black, and instead of feet he had goat's hooves. He also had a tail, but Lucy didn't notice this at the first, because it was nearly caught over the arm that held the umbrella, so as to keep him from trailing in the snow. He had a wooden muffler around his neck too, and his skin was rather reddish. He had a strange but pleasant little face, with a short pointed beard and curly hair, and out of the hair there stuck two horns, one on each side of his forehead. One of his hands, as I've said, held the umbrella. In the other arm he carried several brown paper parcels. What with the parcels and the snow, he looked just as if he had been doing his Christmas shopping. He was a fawn, and when he saw Lucy, he gave such a start of surprise that he dropped all his parcels. "Goodness gracious me!" exclaimed the fawn. Okay, so that is all for today, and I will read the next chapter next time I see you, and then we will continue. Please let me know if you're enjoying this story, and we will have a little bit more in next time. I'll see you then. Bye for now.